my hands won't stop shaking. If you're watching this, leave a comment telling me where you're from, subscribe, and stick with me, as I explain how cutting ties with your family can sometimes be the first step toward healing. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston with my parents, Diana and Frank Watson, seemed like the kind of normal life everyone imagines. Our two-story colonial house, with its manicured lawn and white picket fence, looked like something out of a magazine. My father worked as an accountant, while my mother owned a small bakery downtown. I was 6 years older than my younger sister, Heather, a distance that defined our relationship from the beginning. From my earliest memories, I've always been the responsible one. By age 10, I was helping pack Heather's school lunch, checking her homework, and making sure she had her stuffed bunny at bedtime. Our parents worked hard, pursuing their careers, and I naturally fell into the role of caregiver. I didn't mind much, really. I adored my little sister, with her golden curls and infectious laugh. When she reached out her hand to me, I felt important, needed. The expectations for us were completely different, however. My grades needed to be perfect. A B? Only if it was a B+. Why not an A? I was second in the science fair? Try harder, Cassandra. Meanwhile, Heather was bringing home C's and still receiving praise just for passing. She was the youngest, the precious one who needed to be protected. I was the strong one, the one who could handle the pressure. The first signs of a pattern that would form appeared when Heather turned 8. When toys went missing, they mysteriously appeared in my room. When cookies disappeared from her mother's bakery samples, crumbs somehow ended up in my backpack. Small things easily overlooked. I still remember the first major incident. I was 14, Heather was 8. Our mother's favorite crystal vase, a wedding gift from Grandma, was broken on the living room floor when our parents arrived home. Heather was trying to reach a book from the high shelf and knocked the vase over. When confronted, her blue eyes filled with tears as she pointed at me. Cassie asked me to go up there. She said I was scared. The look of disappointment on my parents' faces cut deeper than any punishment. I tried to explain, but my words had no effect. Why did you encourage such dangerous behavior, Cassandra? You know better. You're the older sister. That night set a pattern that would follow us for decades. Heather learned she could shift the blame onto me with a few tears, and I learned my truth mattered less than her. Comfort. Throughout high school, I maintained a 4.0 GPA while being involved with the debate team, the yearbook committee, and still finding time to work at the local library. Every minute was scheduled, every accomplishment noted on college applications. Meanwhile, Heather entered her rebellious phase early, skipping classes, sneaking out at night, and experimenting with cigarettes and beer at 14. My parents worried but offered few consequences. When she was caught, the blame somehow always returned to me. You should have been watching her, Cassandra. Why didn't you notice she was struggling? You make it all look so easy that she feels inadequate. The message was clear. Her behavior, at least in part, was my responsibility. My senior year, I received a full scholarship to Stanford. It was my dream college, with one of the best computer science programs in the country. The acceptance letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday, and I danced around my room, the future shining before me. That night, my mother cried during dinner. Who's going to help with Heather? California is so far away. My father remained silent, the disappointment evident on his face. 2 weeks later, I turned down the Stanford offer and accepted a partial scholarship from Boston University. I told myself it was a practical decision. Living at home would save money. I could continue working at the library. It made sense. The look of relief on my parents' faces convinced me I'd made the right decision, even if. My dreams of a future under the California sun were fading. The college years passed in a whirlwind of classes, part-time jobs, and helping manage Heather's increasingly chaotic life. While I maintained my scholarships and worked 20 hours a week, Heather barely made it through high school and half-heartedly applied to community college. She dropped out after one semester, claiming it wasn't for her. My parents didn't press the issue. She was finding herself, they said. She had time to figure things out. I graduated with honors in computer science and immediately landed a job at a growing tech company in downtown Boston. My starting salary was higher than my parents' agreed upon salary. I found a small apartment 15 minutes from my family's home and established my independence, but without straying too far so I could help out when needed. And they always needed something. 5 years passed quickly, and my career continued to soar. What began as an entry-level programmer position grew into a senior position, then into team leadership. By 30, I was leading a department of 12 developers and had already more than doubled my starting salary. Each promotion came with flowers from colleagues, celebratory dinners with work friends, and increasingly awkward interactions with my family. Success changed the way they viewed me. The first time I showed up for Sunday dinner in my new car, a modest but new Honda, my father inspected it with pursed lips. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw away," he commented, even though he knew I had saved for 2 years to buy it. My mother quickly changed the subject, asking if I was dating anyone. Her usual and not so subtle reminder that professional achievements meant little without a husband and children. Heather, by then, had already worked several jobs, never staying more than a few months at each one. Waitress, saleswoman, receptionist, direct sales for 3 different multi-level marketing companies. Nothing lasted. That project you mentioned last time, did you get that big bonus? Mom and Dad never redirected these questions, seeming as interested in the answers as Heather was. The breaking point in this phase came when my parents' 12-year-old car finally broke down. The cost of repairs exceeded the value of the car, and they found themselves without transportation. My father had to go to his accounting office, and my mother's bakery required early morning deliveries. Without a second thought, I bought them a reliable used Toyota. Nothing flashy, but very functional. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning, handed over the keys, and expected only a thank you. What I received was a complicated tangle of emotions. Mom cried, Dad looked embarrassed, and Heather, who was visiting, seethed with visible resentment. After I left, she called me. The phone vibrated in my car's cup holder as I drove home. "Now you're showing off?" She spat when I answered. "You know, Jeremy, and I have been saving up for a car for months, but you never offered to help us. But you just put a new car in your parents' garage like it's nothing. You always have to be the hero, don't you, Cassie?" I tried to explain that our parents needed transportation to work, that I wasn't trying to show off or be a hero. But Heather had already created her version of the story, where my generosity was actually a calculated ploy to make her look bad. That night, my mom called to thank me again for the car, but also gently suggested that maybe I could help Heather and Jeremy, just to keep the peace. It was the first time I recognized the pattern clearly. No matter what I did, how I tried to help, or what I sacrificed, it would never be enough. Either I wasn't doing enough, or I was doing too much in the wrong way. I began creating distance, limiting family dinners to once a month instead of weekly, screening phone calls, and establishing boundaries that felt strange and uncomfortable but necessary. The economic downturn hit Boston hard, and my parents' small businesses suffered almost immediately. My father's accounting clients began cutting costs, many abandoning professional services in favor of DIY accounting software. My mother's bakery saw orders drop as people eliminated luxuries from their budgets. Within 6 months, they were struggling to pay the mortgage on the house that had been our home for 25 years. They didn't ask for help directly. They didn't need it. Mom casually mentioned during one of their monthly dinners that they might need to sell their house. Dad commented on the sleepless nights worrying about their finances. Their pride wouldn't allow for direct requests, but the hints were clear enough. I offered to cover their mortgage for 6 months, enough time to reorganize their businesses or find alternative sources of income. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. I set up automatic transfers from my account to theirs, barely. Noticing the impact on my finances thanks to my recent promotion to developer lead. What I didn't expect was for Heather and Jeremy's situation to worsen simultaneously. Their apartment building was sold, the rent went up, and they could no longer afford it. With nowhere else to go, they moved in with our parents temporarily. The temporarily stretched from weeks to months, with no end in sight. My visits became increasingly stressful. The dinner table, once a site for awkward conversations, became a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and overt hostility. Jeremy sprawls on the couch, making minimal effort to acknowledge my presence, while Heather catalogs the ways life has been unfair to her lately. My parents alternate between mediating and adding their own grievances to the mix. 3 months after I started paying off my mortgage, I discovered something that shook me deeply. I stopped by unexpectedly one Tuesday night to drop off some special ingredients my mother needed for a large bakery order. The house seemed empty, but as I set the package on the kitchen counter, I heard voices coming from the back office. I wasn't trying to listen, but my name caught my attention. The problem is that Cassandra doesn't understand how tight things really are, my father said. These mortgage payments are helping, but the business loan is what's killing us. What business loan? I had never heard of any additional financial problems. We shouldn't have co-signed a loan for Heather and Jeremy. Mom's voice sounded tired, but they were so sure that the gardening business would work. I froze, piecing together what I was hearing. My parents had co-signed a loan for a landscaping business Heather and Jeremy had started, a detail no one had told me, despite the significant financial support I was providing the family. I left without announcing my presence, my mind racing with questions. Research that night revealed the truth. 6 months earlier, Jeremy had convinced Heather she could start a successful landscaping business. Despite having no experience in the industry or business management, they had formed an LLC and secured a $50,000 loan with my parents as co-signers. The business failed within 3 months after purchasing equipment they couldn't use properly and hiring employees they couldn't manage. The loan defaulted, leaving my parents responsible for the debt, on top of their existing financial difficulties. I should have been angry, but what I felt was profound exhaustion. At the next Sunday dinner, I arrived with a carefully crafted proposal. I would help pay off the company loan as well, stretching my finances to their limit, but still within manageable limits. In return, I wanted Heather and Jeremy to take financial literacy courses and create a payment plan, even if the payments were small. The reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of gratitude or even embarrassment, my offer was met with defensiveness. Heather accused me of trying to control her life. Jeremy suggested that since I had so much to share, more of my success was the least I could do for the family. The most surprising thing was seeing my parents alongside them. "You don't understand the pressure they're under, Cassandra," my mother said, stroking Heather's hand. "They're young and still figuring it within my tight budget." What I discovered chilled me to the bone. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name in the past 4 months. Cards I had never applied for, received, or used. The addresses listed were variations of my parents' home address. The outstanding balances totaled nearly $20,000. My first thought was that it was identity theft by an unknown criminal. I began the fraud reporting process, but froze when the credit card company revealed the phone number associated with the accounts. It was Heather's cell phone. Reality settled in like a physical weight. My own sister had stolen my identity, opened fraudulent accounts, and accumulated substantial debt in my name. The purchases, when the representative listed them, were clearly far from necessities. Designer clothes, luxury electronics, weekend getaways to beach resorts. I spent the rest of the day stunned, alternating between disbelief, anger, and disappointment. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a matter of misplaced priorities. It was a premeditated fraud, a crime that could impact my financial future for years, coming from someone who shared my blood, whom I helped raise, for whom I'd sacrificed countless times. Sunday dinner arrived, and I went through the motions mechanically. I brought the usual bottle of wine, complimented Mom's cooking, and engaged in superficial conversation about the weather and local news, all while credit card statements burned in the bottom of my purse. When dessert was served, I placed the statements on the table, next to my untouched apple pie. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I simply asked, "Can someone explain this to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked confused at first, then her eyes widened as she looked at the documents. Dad took off his glasses, cleaned them unnecessarily, and put them back on without looking at me. Heather stared at her plate, suddenly fascinated by her pie crust. Jeremy was the only one who maintained eye contact, a calculating look on his face. Heather finally broke the silence. "It's not what you think, Cassie. It sounds exactly like what I'm thinking," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge or consent. This is identity theft and credit card fraud. This is a crime." "Oh, please," Jeremy intervened with a dismissive wave. "Don't be so dramatic. It's family helping family. You're always talking about helping anyway." My parents' response was what really shocked me. Instead of expressing horror at what their youngest daughter had done, they began making excuses. "Heather has been facing so much pressure lately," Mom said, reaching out for mine. I pulled away before she could touch me. "They are trying to bounce back after the business setback," Dad added. "They plan to pay it all off before you move." I stared at them. These people who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, were now justifying criminal behavior because it was easier than holding Heather accountable. Something fundamental stirred within me in that moment. "So you knew?" I asked, looking directly at my parents. "Did you know she stole my identity and didn't say anything?" Their silence was confirmation enough. I turned to Heather, who finally looked up from her plate, a defiant look now replacing her initial embarrassment. "You owed us," she said, her voice rising. "You, with your perfect job and your perfect life, always throwing in our faces how successful you are. When did I ever throw something in your face?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I helped this family financially for years." "That's exactly it," she exploded, slamming her hand down on the table hard enough to make the dishes rattle. "You show up with your money, making us all feel like charity cases. You think you're so much better than us." "Heather, that's not fair," Mom began, but her objection was weak and unconvincing. "No, let her finish," I said, a strange calm settling over me as the years of resentment poured out of my sister. Heather was now standing, her face red with anger. "Everything was fine before you started showing off with your promotions, your new car, and your constant help that no one asked for. Why don't you just disappear? You destroyed our lives." I expected my parents to intervene, pointing out the irrationality of blaming me for trying to help, for working hard, for doing exactly what they taught me to do. But instead, they sat in uncomfortable silence. Dad was staring at his hands. Mom was looking anxiously between her daughters. Then Mom said something that would change everything. "Cassandra, perhaps Heather has a point. You can be a bit overwhelming with your success. It really makes things difficult for her, living in your shadow, and you're always so rigid about rules and doing everything right. Family is more complicated than that." Dad nodded in agreement. "You could be more understanding of your sister's situation. Not everyone has their advantages." "Advantages?" I asked incredulously. "What advantages? Everything I have I earned. I stayed close to home instead of going to my dream college to help Heather. I've given you thousands of dollars. I bought you a car. And now I'm being blamed because Heather committed fraud? You always make everything seem so black and white," Heather spat. "That's your problem. You fail to see that sometimes the rules need to be bent when it comes to family." I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA, but suddenly seemed like strangers. In their eyes, I saw the truth. To them, I wasn't a daughter or sister who had sacrificed and contributed. I was merely a resource to be used, an obstacle to Heather's happiness, and now an inconvenient witness to her moral compromise. I didn't argue anymore. There was no reason to. In that, take the necessary steps to pursue the charges if necessary. Next, I placed a freeze on my credit to prevent new accounts from being opened. Finally, I contacted a lawyer friend for advice on how to protect myself going forward. Practical tasks occupied my hands while my mind processed the magnitude of what had happened. My phone vibrated repeatedly with messages and calls from family, but I silenced them without reading or responding. Any excuses or accusations they wanted to share could wait. I needed space to think clearly. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. My boss, concerned about the unusual request, assured me that I had many personal days accumulated and that I should take whatever time I needed. I spent the day alternating between moments of intense planning and moments of overwhelming sadness. By evening, I had made a few decisions. First, I would stop all financial support to my family immediately. The automatic mortgage payments were canceled, and I notified my parents' bank of the change. Second, I would seek therapy to understand how I had become so involved in this dysfunctional dynamic. Third, I would cut off contact temporarily to gain perspective. I sent a single text message to my parents. I need some time to process what happened. Please don't contact me for a while. I'll get back to you when I'm ready. Then I blocked their numbers, along with Heather and Jeremy's. The action was both liberating and terrifying. My friend Amanda came to my apartment that night, bringing comfort food and a listening ear. As I recounted the events, her expression turned from shock to outrage on my behalf. "Cassie, what they did is not only wrong, it's illegal," she emphasized, handing me another tissue. "And the way they turned it all against you is typical manipulation. I think the hardest part is realizing that this isn't something new," I admitted. "This has been our dynamic my entire life. I just couldn't see it clearly until now. Because you love them and wanted to believe the best in them," Amanda replied softly. "It's not a character flaw. It's being human." Over the next few days, I established a new routine. Mornings began with journaling, pouring out thoughts and memories that suddenly surfaced in a new light. Afternoons were dedicated to work, where I threw myself into programming projects with renewed focus. Evenings alternated between conversations with Amanda and other friends I'd neglected while prioritizing family, as well as research on therapists specializing in family trauma. A week after the get-together, I attended my first therapy session with Dr. Marlene Foster, a compassionate woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct approach. In her cozy office, with its soft lighting and no clocks, I began to unravel the complicated history of my family relationships. "It seems like you've been the family's scapegoat and savior for much of your life," she observed during our second session. "That's an impossible role to sustain." "I never thought of it that way," I admitted. "I always thought I was just doing what any good daughter and sister would do." Working with Dr. Foster became a fulcrum in the turbulent sea of emotions I faced daily. Under her guidance, I began to notice patterns that were previously invisible to me. How Heather's crises always seemed to coincide with my achievements. How my parents reinforced the dynamic, expecting me to solve problems while never holding Heather accountable. How I had internalized the belief that my worth was tied to what I could provide, not who I was. 3 weeks passed without contact from my family. 3 weeks of intense self-discovery, painful realizations, and gradual healing. I removed my parents from my emergency contact list. I changed my passwords and security questions. I began researching apartments in a different part of Boston, considering for the first time that geographic distance might be necessary for my mental health. During this time, I also reconnected with parts of myself that had been neglected. I joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never prioritized. I tried a painting class, discovering the meditative pleasure of creating without worrying about perfection. I had dinner with colleagues, building friendships that had previously been limited to professional interactions. The apartment also began to transform. I cleaned out boxes of childhood memories I'd been hoarding, keeping only the items that truly brought me joy, not out of obligation. Family vacation photos were replaced on the walls with artwork that truly spoke to me. The space became truly mine, perhaps for the first time. Amanda noticed the change during a visit on Saturday. "You seem lighter somehow," she commented as we drank coffee on my little balcony, as if I had let go of a weight I had been carrying for a long time. "I think so," I replied. surprising myself with a genuine smile. I still have moments of doubt and sadness, but now they are less intense. What about the vacation fund? Amanda asked, referring to the savings account I'd been keeping for years for a dream trip to Japan, which I'd repeatedly postponed due to family obligations. I think the time has come, I replied, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. I'll save it for spring next year. That afternoon, I made the reservations. 2 weeks in Japan, exploring ancient temples and modern cities, experiencing a culture I'd been studying remotely but never imagined I'd experience in person. The confirmation email brought tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of possibility. For the first time in my life, I was planning my life around my own dreams, not the needs of others. 3 weeks of no contact turned into a period of profound transformation. Weekly sessions with Dr. Foster became a refuge, where I could explore complex emotions about my family without judgment. The initial shock and pain gradually evolved into something more nuanced, understanding without excuse members as beneficiaries and designating charities aligned with my values in their place. Professionally, this period brought unexpected growth. Freed from the constant drain of family drama, my creative energy flourished. I proposed an innovative feature for our flagship product that was recognized by the company's executive team. My boss mentioned the possibility of a promotion to director within the year. The most surprising development came through a bulletin board in my local coffee shop community. A flyer advertised the need for volunteers for a weekend coding workshop for girls from low-income families. Impulsively, I signed up. The first Saturday workshop introduced me to 12 girls between the ages of 13 and 16, each brilliant in her own way, but lacking the resources and encouragement needed to develop their talents. As I helped one particular 14-year-old debug her first program and watched her face light up when it finally ran correctly, something stirred inside me. This is what true generosity feels like, I realized. Offering skills and support without being drained. Watching growth without resentment. Contributing without expecting gratitude or reciprocity. I became a regular volunteer, helping to coordinate the program and secure additional funding through my professional network. This work fulfilled something in me that family obligation never had. A genuine connection based on mutual respect, not blame or manipulation. New friendships blossomed during this time, not only with Amanda, who supported me throughout the crisis, but also with colleagues who became fellow travelers, book club members who shared my passion for mystery novels, and fellow volunteers who understood the joy of mentoring. For the first time, I built relationships based on shared interests and values, not obligation or proximity. As the weeks turned into months, I began to purge the last vestiges of my old life. The process was both painful and liberating. Each childhood item required a decision. Was it something I kept because I truly valued it, or was I holding on to it out of obligation? Photo albums, report cards, elementary school artwork. Everything went through this sifting process. Some items were easy to discard, associated only with difficult memories or expectations. Others brought genuine smiles and warmth, earning their place in my new life. The most challenging were those that carried mixed emotions, like the wool sweater my mother knitted for my college graduation. Eventually, I kept it, recognizing that complicated relationships can still contain threads of genuine love. Planning my trip to Japan became a symbol of my transformation. Each night, I researched another aspect of the journey, from accommodations in Kyoto to hidden neighborhoods in Tokyo. I joined language learning groups, mastering basic phrases and customs. The anticipation of this long-delayed dream sustained me through difficult moments of doubt. One particularly significant step involved my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. I had left behind several possessions over the years, things too large for my apartment or too connected to my past to display, but too meaningful to discard. With Dr. Foster's encouragement, I hired a moving company to remove these items while my family was away, leaving a polite but firm note explaining the move. The boxes arrived at my apartment the next day. Sorting through their contents became a therapeutic ritual, deciding what to keep, donate, or discard. High school journals, academic competition awards, the worn teddy bear that bore witness to my childhood tears and triumphs. Each item represented a piece of my history that I was now reclaiming on my own terms. During this process, a realization began to crystallize. The family I had sacrificed so much for existed more in my imagination than in reality. I had been loyal to an ideal, to a hope of what we could be, rather than seeing clearly what we truly were. This truth hurt, but it also freed me from impossible expectations, both of them and of myself. As the 3-month no-contact milestone approached, I felt a sense of readiness I hadn't expected, not necessarily for reconciliation, but for whatever happened next. I had built a life that was truly my own, anchored in my values and choices, not in the expectations of others. I had created boundaries and developed the strength to maintain them. Whatever happened to my family, I wouldn't lose myself in the process. The night before, I unlocked her numbers. I stood on my balcony looking out at the Boston skyline, the city lights reflecting off the harbor. I felt a deep peace, grateful for the painful awakening that ultimately led to genuine growth. Whatever tomorrow brought, I was ready to face it as the person I'd become, not the person I'd been taught to be. Morning arrived with an unexpected heaviness. I slept restlessly, with dreams filled with confrontations and reconciliations. Sitting on my bed, phone in hand, I took a deep breath and unlocked the family's numbers. Within seconds, notifications began to appear. 14 missed calls since the previous day. 5 from Mom, 4 from Dad, 3 from Heather, and 2 from Jeremy. My finger hovered over the voicemail icon, hesitation gripping me. Dr. Foster and I had discussed this moment extensively. I had a plan. Boundaries firmly established, responses rehearsed. Still, my heart raced as I pressed play and put the phone on speakerphone. The first messages were, as expected, accusatory. Mom's voice was tense with indignation. "Cassandra, this silent treatment is completely inappropriate. We need to discuss the credit card situation like adults. Call me back immediately." Dad's followed the same line. "Your mother is very upset with your behavior. Whatever problems you have, cutting ties with your family isn't the solution. We're still waiting for an apology message." Processing the emotional manipulation mixed with what felt like a genuine crisis. The old Cassandra would have immediately returned the call, rushing to resolve the issue, accepting the lukewarm apology in exchange for the comfort of being needed. The new Cassandra recognized the complexity of the situation and my own conflicting feelings. Instead of calling my family, I called Dr. Foster. After explaining the situation, I asked for her perspective. "What do you want to do, Cassandra?" she asked, turning the question back on me. "Not what you feel you should do, but what you really want to do," I thought carefully before answering. "I don't want them to lose their home. Despite everything, I care about their well-being, but I also don't want to fall into the same patterns again. I need accountability, not just because they need something from me." "Again, this seems like a well-thought-out limit," she stated. "Perhaps you could consider what concrete actions would demonstrate this responsibility to you." After our call, I contacted a financial advisor with whom I had previously spoken about my own investments. I explained the situation broadly and asked if he would be willing to participate in a family meeting as a neutral party. He agreed, suggesting we meet at his office rather than at my apartment or my parents' house. I felt that neutral ground would be essential for this conversation. Only then did I send a message to my parents. "I received your messages. I'm willing to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Westbrook Financial Advisors to discuss the situation. The address is 447 Boylston Street. Please come prepared to have an honest conversation about everything that happened." The response was immediate. "We'll be there. Thank you, Cassie." I spent the night preparing myself, not only financially, but emotionally. I reviewed the boundaries I'd established with Dr. Foster. I rehearsed responses to potential manipulation. I reminded myself that helping didn't mean giving up the strength I'd gained. When I arrived at the financial advisor's office, my family was already waiting in the reception area. Mom seemed smaller somehow. The confident bakery owner was now a woman diminished by worry. Dad's shoulders were slumped in a posture of defeat I rarely saw. Heather stood a little to the side, examining her manicure with practiced indifference, while Jeremy scrolled through his phone beside her. Mr. Westbrook welcomed us into a comfortable conference room, introduced himself, and explained his role in facilitating our conversation. I asked him to begin by objectively reviewing our current financial situation, which he did with professional clarity. The mortgage was indeed in foreclosure. Payments on the business loan were 3 months overdue. Credit card debt, along with fraudulent accounts in my name, had accumulated to alarming levels. My parents' retirement accounts had been drained by early withdrawals, with steep penalties. As the grim financial picture unfolded, I watched my family's reactions. Mom wiped away silent tears. Dad stared at the table, nodding occasionally, confirming the more difficult details. Heather's indifference gradually gave way to dismay as the gravity of the situation became clearer. Jeremy seemed unfazed, his eyes darting occasionally to the door, as if calculating an escape route. When Mr. Westbrook finished his assessment, he turned to me. Cassandra asked me to outline some possible solutions, but first, she would like to discuss some personal matters with you. All eyes turned to me. The speech I had prepared suddenly seemed inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. Instead, I spoke from the heart. Before we discuss any financial assistance, I need to talk about what happened. Heather stole my identity and committed fraud. You all knew about it, and not only did you fail to tell me, but you even blamed me when I found out. This broke something fundamental between us. Mom started to interrupt, but I held up my hand, remaining firm. I've spent these past few months rebuilding my life and understanding my worth beyond what I can provide for this family. I'm willing to help with the immediate financial crisis, but only on terms that protect us all going forward. Dad cleared his throat. What kind of conditions? First, I'll help with the mortgage to avoid foreclosure, but the payments will go directly to the bank, not to you. Second, I'll help with the business loan, on the condition that Heather and Jeremy take financial responsibility courses and create a payment plan for me, even if it's a small monthly payment. Heather's posture stiffened. So you're still trying to control everything? No, I replied calmly. I'm setting boundaries that respect both my contribution and your autonomy. I'm offering support that doesn't allow for destructive patterns. Third, I continued, we should all go to family therapy together for at least 6 sessions. I'm not interested in blame or punishment, but I need an acknowledgement of what happened and a commitment to healthier relationships going forward. The silence that followed seemed endless. I watched the emotions play out on their faces. Resistance, calculation, and finally, a reluctant acknowledgement of reality. Mom was the first to speak. We don't deserve your help after what happened, but we're grateful that you still offer it. It was the first genuine acknowledgement she'd made, and something tight in my chest loosened a little. Mr. Westbrook guided us through the nuts and bolts, payment, schedules, course registration, and therapist recommendations. Jeremy's contributions to the conversation were minimal, his discomfort with responsibility evident in every fleeting glance and noncommittal shrug. I wondered if his relationship with Heather would survive this new paradigm, but I realized that was no longer my concern to manage. As the meeting ended, an awkward moment hung between us. The usual family goodbye of hugs and kisses seemed inadequate given everything that had happened. Instead, I offered a small smile and simply said, I will be in touch about therapy appointments. I offered support without overstepping boundaries, careful not to invade the space I'd established. Progress came in small moments rather than grand revelations. Mom called to ask how I was doing, without immediately making a request. Dad expressed pride in my recent promotion, without making comparisons to Heather. Heather, in turn, paid the 3rd month's salary on time. A small amount, but symbolically significant. 6 months after the confrontation, we celebrated Mom's birthday at a restaurant instead of at the family home. The conversation flowed more easily than I expected, punctuated by genuine laughter and only a few moments of awkward silence. When Heather raised her glass in a toast, her words surprised me. "To Cassie," she said, "for teaching us that true love sometimes means saying no, and that helping isn't always the same as fixing. Our family's healing journey is still ongoing. Some days bring frustration and relapses into old patterns. Other days bring hope that we are creating something healthier than what came before. I maintain my boundaries vigilantly, recognizing that they protect not only me but all of us from the harm of enabling destructive behaviors and codependency. My life continues to expand beyond family obligations. Coding workshops have become a central part of my identity. My trip to Japan met all my expectations, and planning my next adventure, an African safari, brings similar joy. New friendships deepen, romantic possibilities emerge, and professional growth continues. Most importantly, I learned that answering the call, both literal and figurative, of family doesn't mean abandoning myself in the process. True connection requires boundaries as much as openness, accountability as much as forgiveness, interdependence rather than codependency. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? Sometimes the hardest part of caring for others is learning to care for yourself first. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about journeys of healing and growth. And remember, sharing these stories helps others who may be facing similar challenges. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and I wish you strength in your own boundaries and healing in your relationships.